Now, about a month ago, my friend wanted to hire me to paint him a few simple Space Wolves, but I said Space Wolves don't really do simple, so how about instead I make you an entire kill team of really awesome Space Wolves that will feel like individuals, rather than the exact same Space Marine in a slightly different pose. And he loved the idea. Now, as I didn't want to charge my friend for an entire custom kill team, I gave him a different idea. How about you buy the 2 boxes I'll need for this, and I'll take care of the rest. I got started with the Assault Intercessor box and began defacing the model, as well as starting to provide a lot of different battle damage. And after my Space Wolves finally looked like they walked through a bullet storm and got smashed by 12 different chain swords, I had to think of how can I make them look like Space Vikings. Now, fortunately, a while ago, I 3D printed a bunch of different custom bits that I knew would be a perfect match for this project. They were by Greytide Studios, who gave me them for free, so big thank you to them. Now, even though this kill team will consist mostly of melee units, I did not want to have the exact same chainsword on every single guy. So I found these very interesting melee claws that I knew would make him stand out instantly, and mixed one of the normal Intercessor shoulder pads with one of these more fancy ones. For the head, I really wanted to go with this really animalistic one that had these very interesting tusks, but I couldn't find a good way to fit it inside. So as a cool alternative, I went for this one with a wolf head, which made this guy overall look like a shaman, so I gave him a totem on his power pack. I knew that at least one of them had to look like a proper Assault Intercessor. And I definitely wanted to use this cool bolter that had this mid-reload animation on him. I gave him a really nice shoulder pad, and then for some unknown reason, I gave him a jump pack. Honestly, I think it looks really cool and matches the animated pose where he's almost like jumping mid-air, and additionally, in kill team, it's not going to be an issue. Now, when it came to the leader of the squad, originally I was going to use the one from the Command heroes, but he just looked too much like an Ultramarine and it really didn't feel right for the squad, so I ended up finding a body with just a very interesting pose from the Infernus set, but I couldn't really find the right arm to match him. I tried a lot of different variations and nothing seemed right, so I had to sacrifice an arm from one of my Blade Guard veterans. It's a bit painful, but the moment I put it on him, it just looked perfect. As this would be the leader of my squad, I did try to look for a lot of different bling to make him more interesting, and removed all the different insignias that I knew would not match his character. Now, even though I wasn't going to use the Sergeant from the Company Heroes box, I was going to use some other parts in there, and I really couldn't help myself but just go with the cinematic pose of him holding the bolter in one arm. With this being the leader of the group, I wanted to give him a really fancy looking loincloth, but none of them exactly would fit on this chest piece, so I did have to search quite a bit and then additionally modify the crotch area by just scraping a large portion of his leg. Even though I just settled for this really simple fur cloth, it still matched the aesthetic. But where I didn't have to compromise was this absolutely massive totem. Now, a cloak is one of those things where people either love it or hate it, so I decided to keep it separated and just not glue it, as it's easily attachable. Borrowing from Norse mythology, where Odin sacrificed his eye to gain immense wisdom, I chose to do the exact same thing for my leader. And additionally, it also just made him look really badass. Now, when it came to the heavy Intercessor, rather than using Gravis armor, I had a different idea. To make him feel like a true veteran of the squad, I decided to go with the one from the Company Heroes. And I gave him the fanciest looking shoulder pad I think I've ever seen. It is literally just a massive bear head, which is kind of disturbing to say out loud, but it looks really cool. And then just a very simple, sort of like this necklace containing a few talismans, a combination of which looked incredible. Now, this is where I had to dip into my normal Intercessors, as a lot of them come with this incredibly over-exaggerated forward lean, which looks fine on some of the Assault Intercessors, but really didn't work for me. By switching over to the normal Intercessors, I was now able to use these very ornamental and exaggerated belts that had a lot of detail that made this unit stand out a lot more. While I was assembling him, I really wasn't sure as to what I should make his role in the kill team. Even though a Grenadier works really well in kill team, I wanted this guy to be a little bit more of a multi-purpose unit. Whereas by giving him a normal bolter as well as a hand holding the grenades, you could essentially go into a game saying he's either just a normal Intercessor or a Grenadier. And I also managed to find one of the helmets from the classical upgrade sprue. Now, for the last guy, I was beginning to scratch my head as I thought I ran out of unique weapons. When I remembered I had this insanely awesome looking two-handed axe that I was saving for a different unit, which also had this very interesting loincloth that combined different armor plates with a bit of chainmail. Then I tested out a few different shoulder options, but none of them really felt right. So I ended up going with probably the simplest shoulder pad in the entire collection, but it already had the battle damage I needed, so I saved myself a few seconds there. Then I thought I should go for one of the more interesting power packs, but I thought simplicity would work the best, so I settled with a classical one. And as Space Wolves like to put wolf in everything, these guys shall be known as the Wolves of Death. Now, when it came to painting them, I really didn't want to half-ass this project, so I first had to figure out the color scheme. I took out a bunch of different colors that I thought would work really well, and I started by mixing them around, trying to figure out what shade of blues essentially would work for my armor. I tried a lot of different variations until I finally settled on one that felt the most Space Wolfish to me. I knew that keeping the color scheme with just 3 simple colors will make it very easy for me, as I like to mix my colors, and the more colors you end up mixing, the more difficult it gets to repeat that on the exact same model, so this should make the process definitely a lot easier. I started by airbrushing my base tone onto the miniatures, but this was the only time I used it. Then I ended up applying one of my experimental sort of like washes / contrast paints that ended up working pretty well. It's something I want to experiment with in the future, but for now it's essentially just an aid to make the model look a lot less flat. I mixed in a bit of brown with black to create the idea that there's just a lot of grime and dirt in a lot of these damaged areas. What I found very interesting is that even though I'm using a very dark orange brown and a desaturated yellow colored ochre, on this model they looked incredibly bright. As I wanted to specifically use the colors I selected, to highlight the yellow, I used a little bit of glacier blue mixed into the ochre, combination of which created a very pleasant ice yellow. Then I went through a lot of very thin transitional layers to try to create just a lot of these very hand-painted gradients. Additionally, I did leave the right shoulder pad as blue, even though it's not common. I thought it worked really well here. Now, what I did not expect when I started painting them is that it was going to take me over a week. And I don't mean that like I painted them sometimes within a week. Every single day of that week, I would actually paint them for over 4 to 6 hours, and somehow it felt like this project was never gonna end. I don't know why it took so long. I did pay a lot of attention to a lot of different details, and I tried my best to make them look really good, but I still just do not understand why it took that long. But anyway, I hope you enjoyed this skill team, and let's see the final result.